Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Damascus Radio, and it's time for our news for tonight. We're joined here by Khalid Sakhbani and Basim Baktash. President Bashar al-Assad visited the Martyrs Monument on Qasim Mount today on the 39th anniversary of Tishrin, or the October Liberation War, which restored the dignity and the pride of the Arab nation. Upon his arrival, President al-Assad was received by Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Armed Forces, Minister of Defense General Fahd Jassim Lefrage, and Chief of General Staff of the Army and the Armed Forces General Ali Abdullah Ayoub. President al-Assad received flowers from the martyr's son and shook hands with the Assistant Secretary General of the Al-Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party, the two Vice Presidents, Assistant Regional Secretary of the Al-Ba'ath Party, Deputy Chairman of the National Progressive Front, the Speaker of the People's Assembly, the Prime Minister, the Deputies of the Defense Minister, and the Chief of the General Staff, and the Chief of the General Staff of the Palestinian Liberation Army. Later, President al-Assad laid a wreath of flowers on the Martyrs Monument and recited Al-Fatiha, or the opening chapter of the Holy Quran, along with a number of senior officials for the souls of the martyrs. The Martyr and Farewell tune was played. Before leaving, President al-Assad exchanged talk with a number of the martyrs' sons on the sublime meanings of heroism that the martyrs of the homeland achieved through Syria's history. The people of the occupied Syrian Golan have said that the current battle in Syria is no less important than October Liberation War, as the homeland is involved in a battle against aggressors and conspirators. In a statement on the occasion of the 39th anniversary of the October Liberation War, the people of the Golan said that victory is drawing near and the end of the Western Zionist scheme is becoming close at hand as the project is collapsing under the blows of the Syrian Arab army. The people of the Golan reiterated a trust that the end of the occupation is inevitable, stressing resolve to confront the occupation no matter how arrogant it is, and underlining full backing of the comprehensive national dialogue and the reform program led by President Bashar al-Assad. They called for making the anniversary of the October Liberation War an incentive for further determination to restore the occupied lands and continue struggle until foiling the Zionist scheme. The statement reminded that the barbaric Israeli occupation continues its flagrant violations against the people of the Golan through displacing them and demolishing cities, villages, and farms, building settlements, and stealing water and ancient monuments. The statement saluted the Syrian Arab army, the Syrian people, and President Bashar al-Assad on the occasion, stressing that Syria will emerge victorious from the crisis. Khalid?
Thank you, Basim. The armed forces rescued 8 civilians who had been kidnapped by the armed terrorist groups in the Qadsiya area of Damascus's countryside. An official source said that the army units released the civilians Tamam Darwish al-Hussein, Muhammad Mahmoud al-Rawas, and Muhammad Wasim al-Abd. The source added that another unit of the armed forces carried out a qualitative operation in which they released the civilian Ramzi Murad and Basil Hamoud, who were kidnapped by the armed terrorists 5 days ago. The armed forces also released the kidnapped Basim Mahmoud al-Hassan, Ibrahim al-Ali, and Abdullah Hassan Murad in the same mentioned area. In Aleppo, the Syrian Arab Army has destroyed 2 Dushka-equipped cars along with 7 Mercedes automobiles, and they killed a number of terrorists, among them 4 Turks, in the Isharat neighborhood in Bustan al-Qasr city of Aleppo. Meanwhile, a unit of the army destroyed 3 Dushka-equipped cars, killed the terrorists in a qualitative operation targeting the sites of the mercenaries in the Firdaus and the Aruba Club, which are in Bustan al-Basha area and in al-Sheikh Khadr. A unit of the army also destroyed 6 Dushka-equipped cars, killed the terrorists at the Kurum neighborhood on the airport highway. A source in the Aleppo city said that another army unit clashed with the armed terrorist groups that were terrifying the families in Al-Sheikh Said, killing a number of terrorists. In Damascus countryside, a unit of the armed forces destroyed a factory for manufacturing explosive devices, along with a number of mortar shells in Al-Khaburi neighborhood in Al-Hamiyeh. In Homs countryside, the authorities chased down an armed terrorist group that attacked the mourners, escorting an old man who was martyred on Friday by terrorist gunfire in the Smene village. The news reporters quoted a source in the province as saying that the pursuit resulted in clashes with the group's members, which ended in killing a large number of terrorists and injuring others. The source mentioned that the terrorist group attacked the mourners, and this resulted in the killing of 4 of them. Meanwhile, an armed forces unit repelled an armed terrorist group in the Deir al-Balah area of Homs countryside, or in Deir al-Balda area in Homs countryside, killing a number of terrorists and injuring several others. A unit of the armed forces also clashed with an armed terrorist group that terrorized citizens in the Taiba village near the town of Al-Hula, killing a number of terrorists. Another unit of the armed forces destroyed a den for the armed terrorist groups in Al-Qasir countryside in Homs, killing a number of this terrorist group. Back to you, Basim.
Thank you, Khalid. Iraqi Premier Nouri al-Maliki has reiterated that the solution to the crisis in Syria is a political one through dialogue and stopping the flow of arms into it, away from foreign interference, and according to Geneva communique. In an interview with RT television, al-Maliki expressed deep regret that Arab countries have not complied with decisions that call for a peaceful solution and continue to send weapons to Syria. He added that foreign interference in the Syrian affairs and pumping weapons into Syria have led to the current deadlock and will make it even worse were they to continue. Al-Maliki said, if these countries care for the well-being of the Syrian people, they have to realize that this course will undermine the Syrians. They have to stop pumping weapons into Syria that exacerbate rifts and discord, and to stop fantasizing about gaining influence in Syria. He warned the countries which are backing arms and funds smuggling into Syria of the dangers of this trend, indicating that the internal situation of their own countries will become vulnerable and is already becoming so due to awakening sectarianism, meddling, and expansionism. That's why these countries are beginning to feel the consequences, for Syria is a pivotal country in the region. The Communist Party of Greece, or the KKE, has affirmed that Syria is being targeted by imperialist forces as a part of a plan against its role in the Middle East, which has geostrategic significance due to its energy resources. In a statement published by its official newspaper, Rizos Pastis, the KKE stressed that the Syrian people alone can decide Syria's future, and the most important issue is preventing imperialists from waging any war in the region. The party called on the Greek people and the peoples of the region to fight against imperialism to guarantee peace and coexistence in it, underlining the need for Greece to stay out of this war and not involve itself with any side taking part in imperialist plots. The KKE noted that recent developments in the Syrian crisis prove that war and foreign intervention are the same thing as far as imperialist and NATO countries are concerned. Back to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Basim. The members of the United Nations Security Council have condemned in the strongest terms the terrorist attacks that took place in Aleppo on October the 3rd, causing dozens of deaths and over 100 civilians injured, the responsibility of which was claimed by Jabhat al-Nusra group that is affiliated to the Qaeda organization. In a statement issued on Friday, the Security Council members expressed their deep sympathy and sincere condolences to the families of the victims of these heinous acts and to the people of Syria. The members of the Security Council reaffirmed that terrorism in all of its forms and manifestation constitutes one of the most serious threats to the international peace and security, and that any act of terrorism is criminal and unjustifiable, regardless of its motivation, whenever, wherever, and by whomever it is being committed. The members of the Security Council reiterated their determination to combat all forms of terrorism in accordance with its responsibilities under the Charter of the United Nations. The Turkish Yurt newspaper has said that the government of the Justice and Development Party has to take a neutral stance on the events in Syria instead of supporting the groups of the so-called armed opposition. The journalist Ali Sermin wrote an article published by the newspaper called "Turkey was inevitably affected by the events in Syria, so it was very necessary for it to adopt new policies and to be aware of the instigation of others that will bring nothing but more damages. The Turkish government was wrong at seeing the whole region through a sectarian vision." He added that the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is carrying out the policies of the West in Syria and in the region and bearing the political and material burdens of this policy. The newspaper also revealed that the mortar shell that was launched against a Turkish town is only being used by the NATO. Back to you, Basim.
Thank you very much, Khalid. 5 people were killed or injured, including 2 policemen in separate terrorist attacks in Iraq today. A security source said that an explosive charge went off in a vegetable and fruit store in a Saidi area to the west of Baghdad, which resulted in the killing of 30 civilians. Another security source reported that an explosive device was detonated inside a police checkpoint in the Al-Anbar province near the Fallujah cemetery, killing 1 policeman and injuring another. And in Salah ad-Din, to the north of Baghdad, armed men opened their machine gun fire on 3 civilians in Al-Ahwaish to the south of Tikrit, killing 1 civilian and injured the other. Bahraini police have fired tear gas, sonic bombs, rubber bullets, and used water cannons to disperse peaceful demonstrations in the capital Manama. Eyewitnesses said that the protesters of both men and women chanted slogans demanding freedom and democracy and the downfall of the regime. The witness added that the police surrounded the Jad Hafiz village 1 kilometer from Al-Manama to stop the flow of protesters to the capital. These protest demonstrations come following the funeral of a Bahraini youth who died last Tuesday in hospital, who was imprisoned for last year's demonstrations. In Tehran, Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces and member of the Higher Council for National Security, General Sayyid Hassan Fairouzabadi, has stressed that the escalation of the war between Turkey and Syria is an American target and does not serve Islam or Muslims. General Abadi stressed that the escalation is a U.S. demand and that efforts should be exerted to stop the interference in each country's affairs, expressing hope that both Syria and Turkish officials would have or overpass the current critical stage by returning to religious values and self-restraint. Abadi described the NATO presence in the area as a threat to Turkey. And now over to the final item with my colleague Khalid.
Thank you, Basim. The governor of the Central Bank of Syria, Dr. Adib Mayali, asserted that Syria has enough foreign monetary reserves, which qualifies it to manage the state's economic situation and its affairs. He pointed out in a statement to the Financial Times newspaper that the government is decreasing its expenditure so it can reduce the consumer's use of the hard currency and preserve the country's foreign currency's reserve. He also stressed that the Western countries are waging a war against Syria by supporting the terrorist armed groups and imposing economic sanctions, which are causing the revenues to go down, and this is affecting the citizens' livelihood. He also pointed out that the fact that the West will never be able to subjugate Syria, he highlighted that the Syrian pound is in a good state and that the government aims at reducing the effects of the crisis and storing the basic materials such as wheat.
The end of our news for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The political festivals and the fairs extend on a larger scale in the world at large. Ankara, the springboard, triggered the festivity carnival of assaulting Syria during the General Conference of the Development and Justice Party. It was a debunk American tradition of the means that displays the party's stand during the elections campaigns in the U.S. In that festival, Turkish Premier Erdogan has not forgotten to recall what his friends and allies used to do in their festivals as he was performing in his show. Exploiting the podium of the UN General Assembly in New York, Egypt's fresh president, the Prince of Qatar, French president, and the Turkish foreign minister joined the comic tragedy play of remotely observing the core, thus speaking or specking the most remarkable and most important word for all the world states, the core members, so to show off their potentials in raising the word delivered by the Qatari prince as if it were the most respectable ever. It was screened with a news report which was produced by the English version of Al Jazeera satellite channels. In spite of objection uttered by the journalists who work in the channel, the general manager desired to offer a document and ethnic proof on the non-biasness of the Qatari channel. The proof was also exposed how the channels has swerved of all the ethnic and professional standards besides its neglect of the political standards. All those pompous stands reflect the political bankruptcy and the seas of fiasco and disappointment. However, the conspirators still insist on committing more mistakes and more sins, heedless of the Syrian blood and its sacredness.
That was News and Views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The papers published today gave prominence to the following headlines and news items. Thanks to the gallant soldiers of the Syrian army, Qudsiya town in Damascus countryside is completely cleared of terrorists. A Sahur quarter in Aleppo puts out terrorists, while the army units destroy 27 trucks loaded with machine guns. Also in Damascus countryside, weapons are seized, including mortar cannons and missiles in Al-Hama and Jumraya. Russia renews its adherence to the necessity of solving the crisis by the Syrians themselves. President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, the NATO dates back to the leftovers of Cold War and it must be turned into a political organization. The Turkish newspaper Yurt launches a scandal against Turkish Premier Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It writes that the Turkish government has handed terrorists the shells that landed on Aktashkala, adding that the ammunition is only used by the NATO. Burhanuddin Lashkar, member of the Federation of Chambers of Commerce, says that the planets have not suspended their work, adding that the values of solidarity prevailed among the society's starter. The front page editorial in Athora Daily commemorates the October War of Liberation. The paper says that the High Spirit is now relocated in its deserted positions and the times that have gone into pavilion. This spirit has come back at the time when the Middle East region region's map is redemocrated on a high-tempo rhythm, and in light of the restrictions of the activation that are planting for blood dreams. The spirit of the October War of Liberation brought back all the pages of history which were blown away in the air, yet some genuine documents, statements, and evidence are still alive. Currently, the Syrian Arab army, which has composed the epic-like heroism, is sparkling again. Its heroic achievements are to be added to its historical records that are full of steadfastness and capacity of confrontation. In 1973, the Arabs stood together side by side with Syria, leadership and people. Unfortunately, today some Arab states are partners in the conspiracy hatched against Syria, the paper concludes.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
Damascus Radio presents a special program marking the 39th anniversary of the October War of Liberation. Prepared and presented by Rashid Haidar and directed by Hamdi Shweki. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The October War's anniversary is far more than just a phenomenon event for remembrance or jubilation for its swift triumph. The October War anniversary, 39 years on, induces through scrutiny and recount as to what the war did accomplish, overtoppling the strategic equations with an arrogant and aggressive enemy, Israel, whose overall political and military potentials has faced a real defeat, thanks to the October War of Liberation. Completely new situational criteria and readjusted balancements have emerged to reassert the major role played by Syria. The distinct political position of Syria is acknowledged, as a matter of fact, by all powers having interest or concern in the Middle East issues. This is not a flattering or propaganda or rhetoric to speak about Syria enjoying this prestigious position. It has been asserted pleasantly by friends and foes alike. Over the last few years, Syria has faced so many plots from various foreign sources, big and small. But Syria has emerged to break its way through, stronger than ever before, with the resolve to build up a better future, stable and secure, in an area where tension is boiling over. Something extra distinguished for Syria to add up to advancement and strengthen potentials is that its success is purely self-made without reliance on any other or bringing in outsourced helping hand. With the people well lined up, rallying behind the unique leadership of President Bashar al-Assad, the success is eminent. Though the job is not finished, President Bashar al-Assad looks in earnest for beyond what is happening in Syria. It is a better off future for the generations to come. This necessitates political, economic, and social grounds solid enough not only for the present but for a promising future as well. With wise statesmanship, President Bashar al-Assad has made Syria a major player in the region and in the world affairs. From old-time history, even its primitive pre-civilized eras, Syria has always been the crossover between East and West, and Syria will continue to be so now that the world undergoes drastic changes. Syria, since World War II in fact, political avalanches have been overwhelming the world scene. Long-ignored countries have emerged with a strong presence either for its energy and natural resources or for its hyper-productivity. The West is all eager to have direct geographic access to these emerging powers, and Syria is the sole line-up exactly as it has been throughout history. While holding this great role, Syria shows proven talents and capabilities in carrying out this role with superb wisdom and sense of responsibility, both national and global. On the national level, Syria has always been devoted to the Arab causes, despite huge heavyweight pressures and attempts to shift Syria off its national duties. And its unwavering steadfastness, Syria has heroically stuck to the key national causes, among them, first, complete liberation of the Arab lands from the Israeli occupation. Second, no swap on the Arab lands and rights. And third, backing resistance as the only popular ongoing reply to the occupation, a fact which has made Syria the target for a universal war by the Western superpowers, along with the oil protectorate regimes who want to pass the U.S. Zionist project in the area. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to a special program marking the 39th anniversary of the October War of Liberation. Prepared and presented by Rashid Haidar. And directed by Hamdi Shweki.
Radio Damascus presents Arab Civilization. A weekly program prepared and presented by Juhayna Hafiz. Excavation works carried out by a group of British archaeologists in Al-Hara province, or what is called Al-Himam Desert, east of Jabal Arab in southern Syria, have confirmed the presence of inscriptions on a wide scale in that region, where Bedouin shepherds lived for What draws attention is that a large number of those Bedouins between the 4th century BC and the 4th century AD learned to read and write. They cover the desert's rocks with their inscriptions. It is something really amazing, as the Bedouins of this region, like in other regions of the world, gave no attention to education, neither before nor after that period. Naturally, during that period which preceded the presence of paper abundantly and cheaply, the writing material like papyrus, the skin of animals, or even wood were too rare and expensive for Bedouins to use regularly. People in the towns and villages of the Near East use pottery fractures to write their daily messages and historical events. As the Bedouins were always on the move in search for water and grass, so they resorted to the only source that was abundantly available, namely rocks. The carving process on rocks was very tiring and time-consuming, in addition to the difficulty of moving rocks. Therefore, the Bedouins found it easier to recite by heart poetry, history, and letters, and circulate them verbally. Now that the Bedouins learned to read and write, they entertained themselves and passed the time through inscriptions on rocks. The accurate information the archaeologists have reached is that a large number of the Bedouins of southern Syria between the 1st century BC and the 4th century AD knew how to read and write, as thousands of their texts were found in the desert between southern Syria and East Jordan and north of Saudi Arabia. As they had time, many of them inscribed letters with a high degree of accuracy and often added to them various embellishments and drawings, and many of those inscriptions were of high quality. Although the texts carved on the desert's rocks were very short, yet they depicted the state of the author or writer, what he did and what he felt. They sometimes talked of events that happened in the desert or in the inhabited areas, the news of which spread to the desert. The Bedouins were aware of the situation of the country during the time of Roman occupation, so they chronicled their texts with the date of certain events. After studying tens of thousands of such texts and carvings, archaeologists believed it was possible to get a picture about the Bedouins' daily life, infrastructure, religion, beliefs, and legends, in addition to their relations with cities' inhabitants and the political authorities, particularly the Romans and the Ambards. Although these texts are very short, yet they constitute one of the most important sources and perhaps the only source to study Bedouins' history in the early period of Arab pre-Islam history. Safawi inscriptions and writings were discovered for the first time in Syria in 1858 by a British traveller who was exploring the eastern part of As-Safa region. They were later called Safawi inscriptions after the name of the area where they were discovered. Thousands of written pieces were discovered in Al-Hara province in Syria over a period of more than 70 years after the British travelers' discoveries. 3,000 Safawi inscriptions have been so far discovered and carefully studied.
That was a new edition of Arab Civilization broadcast from Radio Damascus. Radio Damascus presents A Call for Justice.
As Israel continues to pressure its ally, the USA, to support it in launching an attack against Iran, and as the Europeans and Americans keep calling on Iran to stop the uranium enrichment and the development of its peaceful nuclear program, there are voices that emerge from the American inside wondering about the secret of this special relationship between the USA and Israel, and calling on the White House to stop harassing Iran and to turn to the Israeli nuclear arsenal, the only one in the Middle East region. Afrique Assi website has published a lengthy article by American journalist and political analyst Jonathan Koch, in which he referred to the fantasy of the sacred relationship between the USA and Israel, which has tarnished the American policy for years. He wondered about the reason behind American presidential candidates' competition to woo Israel during their election campaign. Koch said this U.S.-Israel relationship looks to be deep and precious on the surface, but in reality it is nothing but a fantasy. Koch referred to something very important that can be summed up in the fact that American politicians prefer to express their long-lasting love for Israel, offering it huge financial aid worth billions of dollars each year, whereas the American national security officials have always considered this ally a partner of whom the U.S. should be cautious, particularly with regard to Iran. Koch said the American officers are the ones who differ deeply with Israel concerning the Iranian nuclear file. The crisis exploded in the course of this month when the Pentagon decided to reduce participation in the joint military maneuvers with Israel due next month. The aim of the maneuvers is to test Israel's anti-missile shield in case of a war on Iran. The only means of pressure the Pentagon used against Israel was the X-Squad radar situated in Israel and operable exclusively by the Americans. Koch said that present officers in the American Army and former CIA agents had admitted that the American security establishment considers Israel its biggest threat concerning the subject of counter-espionage against considering the subject of counter-espionage against the Middle East. The most famous American spy who worked for Israel was Jonathan Bolland, a former officer in the Marines intelligence who passed to Israel thousands of secret documents during the 80s. There are 2 other spies who worked for Israel and were arrested in recent years. The writer adds that Washington has taken those cases of treason into consideration. He cites another example of the constant caution the U.S. displays towards its ally Israel, namely that the latter has been excluded from the group Washington formed for sensitive information activity, which comprises England, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. After this survey, Koch wonders what for is this talk about the special and sacred relationship between the U.S. and Israel if it is based in the first place on deep caution. Part of the answer, he adds, is in the way of intimidation practiced by the pro-Israel lobby in the USA. Francis Finn, who headed the French nuclear agency from 1950 to 1960, the period during which France helped Israel develop its nuclear arms program against the will of the USA, has admitted that the Israeli nuclear bomb was in fact directed against the Americans themselves, not because Israel intends to attack the USA, but because it knows that when it possesses the only nuclear arsenal in the Middle East, the USA will not dare to do anything concerning Israel, even if the latter's political decisions contravene American interests. Therefore, writer Jonathan Koch adds, Israel has decided to prevent any adversary from developing a nuclear weapon. And therefore the USA must look into this arsenal instead of talking about the Iranian nuclear file, Koch concludes.
That was A Call for Justice, prepared and presented by Juhayna Hafez.
You're listening to Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Before we sign off with the national anthem, here is a final look at the news summary. President Bashar al-Assad visits the Martyrs' Monument on Qasyum Mount on the 39th anniversary of the October Liberation War. The people of the occupied Syrian Golan say that the current battle in Syria is no less important than October Liberation War. The armed forces rescue 8 civilians who had been kidnapped by the armed terrorist groups in Qadsiya in Damascus countryside. Iraqi Premier Nour al-Maliki reiterates that the solution to the crisis in Syria is a political one through dialogue and stopping the flow of arms into it. The Communist Party of Greece, KKE, affirms that Syria is being targeted by imperialist forces as a part of a plan against its role in the Middle East. 5 people are killed and 3 others are injured, including 2 policemen in separate terrorist attacks in Iraq. And in Tehran, Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces General Sayyid Hassan Fayrouz Abadi stresses that the escalation of the war between Turkey and Syria is an American target and does not serve Islam or Muslims. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our transmission for tonight. Until we meet again tomorrow at the same time and on the same frequencies, we wish you all the best from Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Good night.